All right, so last time we talked more about social media and in particular LinkedIn and how you can use social, hi Alex, for business purposes and especially job-related purposes. And before we get, which will happen in 2 weeks, before we get much deeper into conversations about the final and start fine-tuning some of the things that I'd like you to think about as you're putting your final presentation together, I still want to be able to provide you with some level of knowledge, experience, ideas, tips, hints on how to be better positioned and maybe best positioned for internships and for job opportunities. And so over the next really 2 weeks, we're going to focus on some of that for the most part. I'll tell you about next week at the end of our class, but for this week, the two things that we're going to talk about today, we're going to look at interview techniques. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about what I refer to as crutches. What are the things that we tend to say and do when we speak that could draw attention away from our messaging? And so we'll talk about that on Thursday, and I'll give you more of a picture a little later on as we're finishing up. But today we're going to talk about interview techniques, which not only will help you as you're sitting across the desk from a potential employer, but again, it's another opportunity for you to both have some prepared remarks, just like you will for your final presentation, as well as to be able to respond extemporaneously, respond on an impromptu basis, like the exercises that we did a week or so ago, because that's really what an interview is all about. So I kind of look at this session in two ways. One, helping you prepare for job interviews, and the second, just to give you more of that experience of both some prepared remarks as well as impromptu remarks, so that way you are in that best position for whatever presentations you have to give. So let's start today with name. And because we're talking about interview techniques, the question that I'd like you to answer once you stand and give your name is, what would be your dream job and why? What would be your dream job and why? Rohan, you want to start?
Yeah. So, my name is Rohan, and I feel like we already had this question, but my dream job would be a travel food blogger. So, because I like food and like experience different cultures.
Good. Nick?
My name's Nick. I don't really have a dream job, I guess. I'm a marketing major, so I guess going into that would be ideal.
What do you like about marketing?
I don't know, it was when I was in high school, it seemed appealing.
Has anybody seen the movie Luckiest Girl Alive? It's a Netflix movie with Mila Kunis, and she plays a marketing whiz, and I just watched it over the weekend. Really interesting movie. Ox?
My name's Ron, and well, currently I'm in accounting, so I would say like something in accounting would be a dream job. And then in parallel to that, I like for the past like 4 years I'm part of the American Red Cross. I would probably like either be like beyond just donor. So I would probably, try to elevate in terms of positions. I was like as a consultant, that's like, because donor good on it has a good idea, like, what they do, what they ask. So I would do like that. And in terms of accounting, it would be like a normal accounting, one-on-one is different than finance. I know finance think much more like, much more encumbered. Just can be, probably can be hectic, but, this would just be like what normal, you know, you write like balance sheets and stuff.
Mhm.
That's probably, as of now, that's what I would be, that's what my agenda would be.
Good, thanks. Jared?
My name is Jared. Unrealistically, I think everyone here knows already, be a professional golfer, but realistically, I would say I would be a lawyer attorney.
What kind of law would you want to practice?
Sort of normal criminal law,
Criminal law.
murders, yeah.
Interesting. All right. Now, I don't know whether we should applaud you or be afraid. Okay, good. But if you need a good attorney, you'll have Jared at some point. Maddie?
My name's Maddie, and I don't know, I was trying to think of something funny to say, but I really don't know what dream job. Maybe like a teacher, but I don't know, they don't make enough, and I think they're underappreciated, so I don't think I'd want to do that. But I can be a writing teacher maybe in another life, but I make lots of money.
I wish there was a life where teachers made a lot of money. Sophia?
My name is Sophia, and I think my dream job would be to like be a boutique owner with multiple different chain stores. Why? I really love fashion, and I want to be a business owner. So yes, and then as a side hustle, I would love like a fitness instructor position at like a high-end gym.
There you go. Well, Chris, you can tutor Sophia on side businesses and the things that she needs to know. Liam?
I am Ian. Probably, I don't have a dream job, but one job I want to do is probably an accountant. But I also like sports, so probably like a sports accountant for like Boston. If not Boston professional team, probably like one of the affiliate or amateur athletes.
Yep, so every professional sports team has full finance departments, as do all college athletic departments too. Emma? I remember that.
I don't really have anything, like, I don't know for sure, but, I was thinking finance, now I'm kind of leaning towards accounting, there's many accounting study, and I actually like, but I'm not passionate, I'm in job with passion, that I don't know what I'm passionate about, so I don't know, I like to travel, and I said that last time.
Right.
But I don't really know what I travel for. Maybe that's just a,
I've heard a lot of college students say that when they graduate, they want to spend that first year or two traveling, which makes sense. There are organizations out there that hire a lot of recent grads to lead travel programs because they know that there's an audience out there. They know that there are college grads who have that focus on wanting to travel, and they also know that they could hire them, I don't want to say cheaply, but relatively inexpensively with the promise that you'll also get to travel as a part of it. So you should look into it. Dulce? Good. Chris?
My name's Chris. Not really sure about dream job, but I just like to be financially stable at some point.
I think everybody could identify with that, definitely. Tino?
I'm Tina, but my dream job, still the same. I really want to be like a big content creator. I think that's cool. Why? Because I don't know. I just see them. They get to do whatever they want. They enjoy life, and they make the money from it. So I just want to do something that would just make me happy, rich.
Good. Jay?
Jay, first off, I find it interesting that out of all questions you asked, this is the one I know the most I don't know, and I'm not sure, so this is the one you choose to ask again.
And I'll tell you why once we go through.
But again, I'm pretty sure it's the same as what I said last time. A lot of hands-on, minimal computers, good hunting money.
Mhm.
But happiness over money, I
Good.
something like that, exactly what that would be, I don't know, don't find out, you know?
So that's an interesting comment, Jay, because you will find as you go through your life, go through your career, that you will make job-related decisions based on those two factors, money and happiness. Or you can substitute for happiness culture, organizational culture, quality of life. Money is always going to be, if not the number one thing, it'll be number two. But sometimes that number one becomes, what will my life be like if I take this job? And how will that change my life? How happy will I be? Which is part of the reason why I'm asking the question again, but I'll get into that after. Daniela?
My name is Daniela, and more realistically, I would say than the last time I answered this question, I would want to be a program manager. I feel like my skill set that I'm learning I have now matches that job, and plus it would give me the opportunity to travel if I want to, so I think it would blend everything I like.
Youth?
Hi, I'm Youth. My name is Thomas, and I'm probably good jobs that I'm gonna be probably I'm actually doing a co-op this semester. I'll be a company.
Okay. Great. Alex?
I'm Alex. As of last time, my dream job was to be a property manager. That still is probably at the top of my list just because I'd have a lot of free time and relatively low stress from those that I've seen and worked with. But I've recently had some friends talking to me about, or trying to talk me into going into engineering program management. So, or project management rather, just because it pays a lot, but apparently it's like really stressful and stuff. But a lot of it, what it is like explaining to customers like why their stuff isn't ready yet and trying to like explain what things do and why it's not your company's fault, like if you're waiting on contractors or other suppliers that are messing up and stuff. So that seems like something that interests me just because I know the field pretty well and I've worked there for a little while, but it does seem like a lot of stress. So.
Good. Austin?
Austin. I'm gonna have to agree with what I said last time. I still want to do something business related and at the same time travel. I don't know what that entails yet. I'm not sure if it's entrepreneurial eventually. But I mean, I'm gonna have to say money is important, but for the time being, especially right after college, I want to spend time doing what I like. I have the rest of my life to work 40 hours a week stressed, so I guess we'll find out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sean?
My name is Sean, and I have two dream jobs. One of them is to be an accountant, just to follow my big brother's footsteps. He makes $250,000, and that's the lowest paying job that he's having right now. And I also want to be a crime scene investigator, mainly fire.
Interesting. Okay. Wait? Influencer. Yeah. So let me tell you why I asked it again. There are two reasons. The first, obviously, is this class is going to be focused on interview techniques. And as you listen to, I'm going to show you a couple of short videos as we talk about it. I want you to think about being on that other side of the desk, that somebody is interviewing you about a job in whatever your dream job is. So that way, as you're listening to, whether it's listening to me, listening to the videos, that you have an idea in your mind of, okay, what would it be like for me to sit on the other side of that desk and start answering these questions? So I want you to have this dream job fresh in your mind. But the other reason, and the last time we did this, I mentioned this, that there are a lot of college students who think that at every point along the way, freshman year, sophomore, junior, senior, that you need to know what it is you want to do with your life. And maybe you'd be surprised, or maybe not, at how quickly college students change their mind about what it is they want to do. Sometimes that's influenced by a class that you take, by a student organization that you become a part of, by the part-time job or co-op or internship that you have. Sometimes it's just influenced by talking to your roommates, talking to a friend, a boyfriend, girlfriend, just having those conversations, listening to your parents. In Sean's case, you look at your brother, so you look at somebody else that you know well and say, let me give that a try. And so if we actually didn't have 4 weeks of final presentations, then I probably would add this again toward the end of the semester. And actually, don't be surprised if we do that during one of our last classes and just ask this question again, because I want you to feel like it's okay to not know today. It's good to have something in mind. And as Jay noted, there are a lot of I don't knows, and that's fine too. But use all of the experiences that you have, all of the conversations. Sometimes it's just you turn on the television, you're streaming something, you're hearing something on the news, or you're reading a blog and it talks about something that catches your eye. And I know I went through it throughout a lot of years in my college years, and even shortly thereafter, where I started to think to myself, okay, I just saw this great movie with an attorney, with a criminal attorney, where you get a defense attorney who gets up and gets his or her client free, and I think I want to be an attorney. Then I see another movie, or I hear about somebody else, and all of a sudden that's what I want it to be. It's okay to feel that way. It's okay to change. It's okay to let the world around you help shape what it is that you ultimately decide that you want to be. And along the lines of the idea of travel and, the conversation that Emma had about wanting to travel, and Daniela, you mentioned travel too. Your first job out of college doesn't have to be what you're doing with your life. And Austin said, right now, out of college, I want to be happy. I want to do something that I really want to do. Well, you might find out that doing something that you really want to do pays you just enough, or more than enough, or it can make you happy. So those are the things that you have to balance. Everybody wants to make a lot of money. But is it a lot of money, or is it enough money? And only you can define what enough is. So how can you have the best quality of life as well as making enough money, which is part of that quality of life? So like I said, that's why I wanted to do it a second time, and who knows, maybe we'll do it a third time too, just to see if anything changes. Now, before we get going, Sean, you have one exercise that we still need to complete with you that you missed a couple weeks ago. So come on up, because I'm going to ask you a question. One question, and then you can go back and think about your interviewing techniques. What do small businesses need to do in this country to survive in this economy?
Personally, I think small businesses need to, that's actually a really difficult question. From someone who actually works at a small business and doesn't make enough money, that's a really difficult question to answer. Because from time to time, we would make from $3,000 to $4,000 a week, and then sometimes it would be $2,000 to $3,000, and then ever since COVID hit, spend less than $2,000 a week. So that's actually a really hard question. To give an answer, I'd probably say make sure that what you have is enough for what you need instead of overstocking. So we would overstock a lot on cups and everything, but if you overstock on cups and if you don't use them and if they're sitting next door for 4 or 5 months, then what is the point of having all of that left over when that money you could put back into the business to make sure that it's financially stable? That's my answer.
Thank you.
I just don't know how to answer that.
That's all right, because in this economy, sometimes there's not a good answer for what you can do to make a small business, help a small business survive. It's been a difficult couple of years. Now, what you can do, though, is learn some good interviewing techniques. So, let's go back and listen to this.
Most interviews, no matter what the industry, are designed to assess a few key areas: professionalism, interest in the job being offered, fit for the job, including applicable skills, and personality. Here are some tips on the do's and don'ts of interviewing. Do be sure to dress appropriately for your interview. If you're a man, wear a suit. You can never go wrong with navy blue, charcoal gray, a white shirt, and a nice tie.
If you are a woman, do make sure you wear a suit to the interview. Either a skirt suit or a pantsuit is fine. Don't wear large jewelry, loud colors, or too much makeup. Don't give a limp handshake. Nice to meet you.
Do give a firm but not bone-crushing handshake. The key to a good handshake is to get the web between your thumb and forefinger fully in contact with that of the person with whom you're shaking hands. Also, don't forget to make eye contact and smile. So tell me about yourself.
Well, I was born in San Francisco, and then my family moved to Boston. Well, actually the suburbs of Boston, about 20 minutes outside, but you tell everyone Boston. And then I went to UPenn in Pennsylvania, and I started out as an art history major, and then I switched to economics. But then I wasn't so sure, so I switched back to art history, and then I had to complete more credits to do the major. It was kind of a pain. So now I'm here with the possibility that I might apply to law school next fall.
This isn't a license to tell your life story. Rather, use this as an opportunity to give a concise summary of your career, abilities, and goals.
I'm a very energetic and organized person, which is why I'm drawn to opportunities such as this one. I have over 4 years' experience at the associate level, and I'd like to further my career path. And I'm also fluent in French, and I've studied and lived in Paris.
Great. Interviewers want to know how you assess your good points and your bad points. What would you say is your greatest weakness or area that you can improve upon?
I have a tendency to oversleep. In the past, I've overslept and missed important meetings.
Okay. When discussing your weaknesses, avoid personality or character flaws. Instead, focus on areas that could be improved upon over time.
If someone isn't working hard enough, sometimes I end up picking up the slack. I'm working on just sticking to my own order of business.
So, are you married?
I'm single.
It's actually illegal for interviewers to ask you certain personal questions, such as your age or marital status, so you don't need to volunteer that information.
If you like, you can answer like this.
Let me ask you, are you planning to have a baby in the next few years?
I'd rather keep the focus on the job, not my personal life.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry to keep you waiting. Thanks for coming in today.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Do you have a copy of your resume? Thank you.
Do you have a business card?
Yes.
Thank you.
So tell me about your last job.
Well, it was really interesting because it had a lot of different elements to it. And I had a lot of responsibility in the position. For example, excuse me. Oh, hey, how are you? Do you mind? Is that all right? Yeah, not too much. Okay. See you then. Bye. So as I was saying before.
If you forget and it goes off during the interview, apologize immediately and turn it off without checking who's calling or answering it. We hope these interview tips have been helpful. For more career advice, go to vault.com/videos.
All right, some good tips there.
Arguably the most crucial part of the job search, an interview can make or break an opportunity. So to help you really prepare, we're going to dissect and analyze an entire interview from start to finish. I'll be sprinkling in a mix of tips about body language, etiquette, and how to answer common questions. Like, when exactly does the interview start? How do you deal with nerves? And how soon can you follow up? For years, athletes have used science and data analysis to improve. Now, we are doing the same for job seekers everywhere. This is Job Science.
This is a really big company, and I really like this video.
Meet Anya, a recent grad majoring in business administration. She's interviewing for an entry-level project management position. Note her posture. Head up, shoulders pulled back, no slouching, and no laid-backness. The interview begins the minute you walk into the building. Anya treats everyone in the office with respect while keeping eye contact. From security personnel to receptionists, anyone you run into on your way in could be asked to give feedback on you. It's normal to be nervous. When nerves kick in, the natural human response is to take short breaths and breathe faster. Stay calm by taking a deep breath before entering. Hold it, count to 3, and then slowly breathe out. Pause. First, ace those introductions. Greet everyone in a way that is authentic to you, like, "Hey, nice to meet you," and then say their name. That one always works. You're more likely to remember their name if you say it out loud when you first meet. A lot of the time, small talk comes up before any questions. It's good to have a few current events or topics in mind. You can't possibly predict what they're going to ask, but you can practice answering the common ones, like, why do you want to work here? What makes you unique? Let's see what our interviewer asks.
So I want to hear more. Tell me a little about your experience and what you bring to this role.
Pause. When this is asked, they're looking to learn what makes you stand out. Be honest with your answers. If that means having to pause and think for a second, that is all right. Think about your past experiences and how the role lines up with your future goals. It never hurts to be honest.
Great question. Ever since I was young, I've always been the organized one in my family.
But wait, don't say great question. Anybody know why? Because if you say great question once, that implies that everything else that's asked isn't such a great question. And if you catch that, then now all of a sudden you want to say great question every time because you don't want that other person to think, okay, I thought that one was a great question, this one isn't. So I never say great question, anytime.
Whether it was helping my parents schedule vacations or color coordinating my closet, naturally that lifestyle got me here, project management. I've been a people person for as long as I can remember. Plain and simple, I love team building and making sure everyone has a part. Just the other month.
Ooh, just really quick, don't speak negatively about previous places you've worked. Instead, talk about what you've learned.
I helped lead a team of 5 to deliver a 3-week sales project a few days ahead of schedule. I'd love to bring these things here.
Perfect. A response like this not only answers the question, but also shows off her personality. But remember, there's no one right way to interview and answer questions. Be yourself and let your personality shine. Be aware of your movements. Practice polite, confident body language. Subtly miming your interviewer's posture can actually create a sense of connection. Of all places, unnecessary movements are hard to ignore in an interview. Whether it's tapping your fingers or bouncing your leg, be aware and stay present.
Hey, it's been great chatting so far. I guess my last question is, do you have any questions for me?
Ooh, this is a hot one. Make sure to have a short list of questions for your employer in your back pocket. Ask the questions you would if you got the job. If tomorrow was your first day, what would you want to know from the manager? Even if you don't have any burning questions, asking a few shows that you did your homework and that you really care. Some include, what do you like best about working here? What are some mistakes people have made in this position? What is a goal you're currently working toward? How will my performance be evaluated?
Well, I did read that you're expanding your software team next quarter. I'm curious how you plan to carry that out.
The interview isn't actually over. Always follow up within 24 hours with a thank you email to the hiring manager. This can be a quick note simply thanking them for their time, or a longer one that elaborates on some of the things you talked about. It's key to leaving a lasting impression. This was the breakdown of an interview. Till next time.
So in those two videos, there was a lot to unpack. There were a lot of do's, some don'ts. And so let's just get into it a little more. I'll give you an idea of what I think are the key things to think about. Before you even go in for an interview, number one, do your homework. Don't ever go into any interview where you have no idea what the company or organization's all about, who you're meeting with. I mean, all of those are things that you can find out ahead of time. So first of all, you go on their website. And you go on the website and you go through every single page of that website to be able to pull out some things that you want to note. And by the way, note them. Take out a piece of paper, take out your phone or computer, and make some notes about the company so that way you can memorize that. I don't mean you have to memorize the entire website, but find out what those points are. You know, what were their sales last year? When you go on any organization's website, typically you have a homepage that has not just a photo, something to catch your attention, but also some key statistics or key background about the company. You know, here's what we do. And then there's usually at the top of the page, there's usually a button that says About. And that's probably one of the most important tabs for you to click on, because that'll likely give you the history of the company, so you know how old it is, you know how far they've come, you know what they're doing now. It usually shows the leadership of the company as well. So it'll show you who all the C-suite people are. If it's a company that has a board of directors, or an organization that has a board of directors or a board of trustees, it'll show you that as well. And so you can drill down. And when I look at something like that, I look to see, do I have any connections to somebody on that board? And so I know someone who applied for a job recently, and when he went on the organization's site and looked at their board of directors, it turns out there was somebody on the board that he has actually worked with in the past. And he didn't even know that this guy was on the board. But that allowed him to make that connection ahead of time to say, I'm going in and meeting with so-and-so for this job. What advice do you have? So go through the website and pick out those things that you think are helpful for you to know, and just make notes of them so that way you can say them back in an interview. You can say, I know, for example, that your sales last quarter were up 15%. What do you attribute that to? So make those notes. Then don't just look at the website, but Google the organization too. Google the company to see what else you can find. Because if there are any big news stories, those will show up when you're trying to do a search. And you want to know whether they're both good, positive stories as well as potentially negative stories. Is the organization being sued by someone? You know, is the fact that there's a new CEO, is it because the last CEO was fired for fraud or stealing from the company or harassment? You know, those are things you can find when you Google the organization, and that'll help you as well, both the positive and the negative. You can learn. Yep, Sophia?
No, you can continue. I just have like a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I was getting interviewed one time, and in the video they talk about like not asking personal questions. And someone asked me like where I see myself in 10 years, and it completely like threw me off guard. And like, would you consider that a personal question, or would you like?
So here's what's interesting. It depends on how you answer it and what the response is from the interviewer. Because if you answer it and say 10 years from now, I'd like to be in a mid-management level position where I have a couple of people that I'm leading, and yet I have a seat at the table within the organization, that's your vision professionally. If you answer like that, And then they say, oh, no, no, no. I don't mean where do you expect to be in the organization. I mean, do you think by then you'll be married and have kids? Then that is a no-no. And you saw that in the first video, that there are things like, what's your marital status? Do you have children? Do you have a family? Those are personal questions that really are illegal to even ask. They shouldn't be asking political affiliation, sexual orientation, or your thoughts about any of these things, sexual orientation, politics, religion. Those are all taboo questions. And so if somebody asks you, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I wouldn't even say, do you mean personally or professionally? I would just assume that they mean professionally and give them the benefit of the doubt. Answer it as honestly as you can, where you see yourself in 10 years. And then let's hope that they just move on from there. The other thing that I'll say, though, in response to that question is you don't help yourself if you're interviewing for, let's say, a small accounting firm, and they say, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And you say, oh, I'd like to be working for one of the big 6 accounting firms in 10 years. No employer thinks that you're going to work with them for the rest of your career. If you remember back when we first started talking about jobs, I made the comment that my friend who's in the career business says that college graduates will have 11 different jobs by the time they retire, 7 of which haven't even been created yet. So let's assume you'll have 11 jobs. Employers know that, but they don't want to hire you thinking that you're already looking ahead to leaving, whether that's in 2 years or 10 years. And so to me, that's a red flag if you say to me, well, in 10 years, I see myself at a big 6 accounting firm, because I don't know if that means you want 2 years with me and then 8 years of growth in a big 6 firm. Learn about the leadership that you'll be meeting with. There is no problem asking when you get a call about an interview. So first of all, you're probably not getting a call from the CEO. You're getting a call from an assistant, you're getting a call from someone in HR. They are very used to you saying, so who will I be meeting with? And you want to be able to have that information so that way you can go on LinkedIn or you can Google those individuals and find out some more about them. All the time, because I have that LinkedIn premium that shows me who's trying to look at my profile, all the time when I'm interviewing people for jobs, I see who looks me up initially to find out more about me. And I like that, because that shows me that they're doing their homework by looking at my profile and trying to learn more about me. Just yesterday, I interviewed somebody for a job in advancement, and she commented on some of the jobs that I've had in the past. I see you've worked at Boston College. So that, again, tells me that she did her homework. And as a manager, that's good to know, because you want somebody like that. And then the other thing that we don't necessarily tend to think about as much as we should is plan your commute, both from the perspective of, if I had this job, how long would it take me to get to work every day? But more importantly, first and foremost, how long is it going to take me to get to the interview? And think about, go on Waze, because Waze is the best, in my opinion, the best way to find out how long it will take at a certain time of day. So if you have a job interview in Boston at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, that's very different than if your interview is at 1 o'clock. And so check out to see how long it's going to take you, and then make sure you plan accordingly. You saw in the video about planning your dress. Make sure that you dress appropriately. Your clothes should be as businesslike as the people or person that you think you're going to interview with. One of the comments I made to you a couple weeks ago is when I speak in any kind of setting, I want to be as well dressed as the best dressed person in the room. So if you're meeting with a company where you think that that person or the people you're meeting with are going to be in business dress, then you be in business dress. If you think that they're going to be in a short sleeve shirt and khakis, then I would go the next level up. You know, if I'm going in for an interview where I think they're going to be in a polo shirt and khakis, I might go like this. Maybe I won't wear a tie, because if that's the organizational culture, to not get that dressed up, I don't want to way overdo it, but I'll be a little better dressed than I think they will be. Make sure your teeth are brushed, make sure your breath is fresh. And by fresh breath, I mean don't have a cup of coffee as you're driving in for the interview. And I'm actually going to say that for two reasons, and it goes along with the last bullet point of drinking and eating. Coffee and tea are diuretics. Diuretics means that when you're drinking them, they constrict your vocal cords. And so even though they're liquids, they will make you dry and they will make your voice strain. And I'll tell you a quick story. One of my dearest friends is Cindy Bigelow, the CEO of Bigelow Tea. Cindy and I were college classmates. And she came up here last year to do a presentation across the street at University Crossing for a lot of Manning School students on business leadership and women in leadership. And we had a luncheon after her presentation where we were talking, and I made this comment about how sometimes when you get up to speak, you have to be careful that you're not drinking coffee or tea because it's not good for you as you're getting up to speak. And then I realized I'm sitting next to the CEO of Bigelow Tea. So maybe I shouldn't have said don't drink tea. But when you're getting ready for an interview, you don't want your breath to smell like coffee. You don't want coffee or tea in your system that's going to strain your voice, because then it's going to crack while you're speaking, while you're in the interview. And you can test it out. I mean, the next time you drink a cup of coffee, start talking, and you'll notice, you'll feel it in your throat. And so that's why the only thing you should drink before an interview or before you speak in any setting is water. You don't want carbonated beverages too, because carbonated beverages could come back and hurt you as you're trying to speak. And then of course, if you drink too much water, make sure that you take care of any other needs that you have before you go in for your interview, because once you go in, that's when the interview starts. You saw the comment about perfume and cologne as well. So, as you're going in for the interview, like I said, leave early. Give yourself plenty of time because you've mapped out your commute. And then arrive early. You never want to be that person who's arriving late. When I was searching YouTube for videos to show you today, if you ever have the urge to look at them, you will find 100 videos on interview do's and don'ts. And there are a lot of don'ts. And they'll show you a lot of these phony sessions where people are just, like the one I showed you last week, the really poor interview. But in most of those bad interviews, the person's always showing up late for the interview. And that is real. I mean, that's the very first thing. You haven't even met somebody yet, and if you're late, then already they have a bad impression of you. So give yourself plenty of time. Whenever I've had job interviews in the past, I've gotten there sometimes as much as an hour early. I mean, you can get there an hour early and go sit in a nearby Dunks and drink water. Or you can go there, get there early and just take a little walk to get your nervous energy out. Or just sit in the car and go through the notes that you made about the website and about the organization. Just make sure you get there early. Also, yep, Alex?
How early would you actually like go into their building to
No more than 15 minutes early. 15 minutes is, to me, is right around the best time to go in because it's plenty early for you to get settled and relax and get your head into the atmosphere, but it's not so early that you walk in, half an hour, you're going to walk in and whoever's greeting you is going to say, wow, you're early. You're way early. And you don't want to also put the pressure on the person who's interviewing you because sometimes if you go in, the receptionist or whoever greets you, they might say to you, why don't you have a seat and I'll let this person know that you're here. And then they won't just yet because they might know that that person's in another meeting. So they might wait 5, 10, 15 minutes. But if they don't, if they call your interviewer right away and say, Alex is here, that person's going to do one of these. Whoa, he's really early. And then they feel stressed because they might say, okay, should I bring him in now, but I'm working on something, or do I just get it done? And I've gone through it as a manager. I mean, there have been times where candidates have shown up early, and I could be in the middle of something, and I think to myself, do I just stop and interview them, or do I finish what I'm doing as long as I can get to them by the appointment time? I never keep people waiting beyond that time if I can help it. And nobody should, but of course you can't control that. But I would say maybe 15 minutes early is good when you go in. Have enough resumes because you've asked the question, who am I meeting with? You know how many resumes you need, but I'd always bring 2 more because there will be times where you might think you're going in to meet with 1 person or 2 people, and you walk into the room and the manager will say, I thought it might be a good idea for Daniela to sit in on this interview as well because she oversees this other area that I think you 2 would be working together. So always have at least the right amount plus 2. It also doesn't hurt to go in with your laptop or with an iPad in your bag, carry a bag with you, just in case you ever have to show it on the screen. I also would encourage you when you do that, when you're going in there with your resume, to make sure that they're in a folder so that way they're not folded or wrinkled. Again, some of the videos that I looked at over the weekend preparing for this, they showed a guy who pulled a resume out of his pocket and it was folded about 3 times and it fit right in here, and he took it out and he unwrapped it and then handed it to the manager. Those things really do happen. And so all of a sudden, if you think back to our very first class, one of the things that I quoted from was the old Head and Shoulders ad that says you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And all of these are first impressions pretty much before you even say anything. So you haven't even spoken yet. So you haven't even had your, how many seconds, Sophia? 17 seconds to catch their attention. And already you're giving off a bad impression. Turn off your phone before you walk into the office. You saw the example of somebody whose phone rang in the interview. Turn it off before you even go into the building. And here's why, because the person that greets you, and I was going to stop it when we saw in the second video when she walked in and she was greeted and then she sat down. the person who greets you is almost as important as the person who's interviewing you. So when I first came here, I just celebrated my 7th anniversary here at UMass Lowell last week. I remember when I first came here to interview with then Chancellor Maloney, and I walked into the Chancellor's suite, and there was a receptionist there who greeted me. I asked her name and had made some small talk with her. Then I sat down, and then the Chancellor's assistant came out. And I know her name because she's the one who called me to set up the interview. So before I even met Chancellor Maloney, I met 2 other people on her team who really represent the face of the university to external visitors. And so after the interview, in addition to sending a thank you to Chancellor Maloney and the other members of the executive cabinet that I met with, I sent one to Margaret and one to Maria. Those people are important because they don't get a whole lot of thank yous. And I can absolutely assure you that they went back to the Chancellor and said, John Feudo sent me a thank you. That's never happened to me before. So you want to make sure that when you walk in, you're already being judged by a pretty important person, that front-facing person for the organization. So you don't want to be on your phone. And that's another reason, Alex, why you don't go in half an hour ahead of time, because if you're in there too early, then you'll be too enticed to sit there on your phone and, let me catch up on my Instagram or let me do anything. And the person who you're interviewing with could come walking out and see you watching reels on Instagram. And you don't want that. So shut off your phone. I wouldn't say leave it in the car. Go ahead, Sophia. No reason to. Because if you're only there 15 minutes ahead of time, then I would say use that time in your head to process the questions, again, that you're going to ask or that you might be asked. The reason why I say don't leave the phone in your car is because if at the end of the interview they say to you something like, I'd really like to have you come back and meet with other people on my team next week, what's your schedule look like? You want to be able to take out your phone, turn it on, and give them whatever information that they need. So have it with you, don't have it on. Be personable and grateful to the person or people you meet before you even go in for the interview. So the receptionist, there have been times where I've been sitting out in the lobby when I've been waiting for an interview and somebody else might come walking, like Margaret, like the Chancellor's assistant, who might come walking out and say, the Chancellor will be with you in just a few minutes. Is there something I can get you? Can I get you a cup of water? And by the way, if you want the answer to be yes, that's okay. There's no right or wrong for that one. So I won't say no, just say no to anything. But you can say yes to water, and then you could bring the water in with you if you want. But make sure that you're personable. If they ask you questions, answer politely. You could feel free to ask them a question or to make a comment to the receptionist and say, it's a beautiful day outside. And make that small talk because, again, you build that connection and that person might go back to the boss and say, boy, I had this really nice conversation with Chris while he was waiting to come in. So you want that. And you want to be grateful too. You want to, if they ask you if you want water, yes please, or no thank you. So be as polite as you can to them. Treat them as well as you would treat the person who you're going to be interviewing with. You saw in the second example, sit still, sit up, and again, Sophia, use that time to prepare. Use that time to think through how the interview might go, to vision it in your mind. Smile, which I know kind of sounds silly, but you want whoever's walking through that lobby to see you sitting there looking pleasant and not looking like, oh my goodness, I just can't stand this. I'm so nervous. I really don't want to be here. Maybe I should just run out. I wish they'd just give me the job without interviewing me. Just sit there and smile and be ready. Be ready for what's to come. Have it all in your head how you think it might work out. You saw in both videos the example of shaking hands and making eye contact. The very first thing you do, extend your hand to however many people you're meeting with, look them in the eye, introduce yourself, especially if you don't think they can pronounce your last name. I've gone through life with the last name Feudo, and it gets pronounced 12 different ways. And yet, if you take out the O, you certainly look at it and say, oh, it's Feud. I mean, that's what my mother used to say. She used to say it's Feud with an O. Everybody can say that, but yet you put 5 letters together, people have trouble pronouncing it. So introduce yourself and say, hi, John Feudo. They'll introduce themselves. And if Maddie introduces herself, then I say, Maddie, nice to meet you. Go ahead.
I like the question about like the shaking hands, because I feel like I always get nervous to do it, like now it's like the pandemic, but I don't know if you want me to shake their hands anymore.
Well, so during the pandemic, you're absolutely right. I think some of that is easing up. I don't see too many people these days who are either fist bumping or not doing it. A lot of times, the person who you're interviewing with will be the first to extend their hand. But I don't think there's anything wrong with you being the one to extend your hand. Because if you extend your hand and the person says, here, why don't we do this? That's fine, because they're still thinking, well, here's someone who's personable, who is making that effort. So even if they don't want to do it, you shouldn't feel awkward about it or embarrassed. But I can see why over the last couple of years there's been less of that. So make eye contact, repeat their name, say it's nice to meet you. You don't have to comment on anything else. And I've seen this in some videos too, where they'll show the candidate shaking and saying, oh, Daniela, that's a great sweater you have on. You don't want to start getting caught in that trap. Because first of all, it's too personal. And secondly, just as I said before with the personal question of, what can you answer, what can't you answer? If you start asking questions like that people think, oh, that's kind of personal, then it puts you in an awkward place. Now, if they comment on what you're wearing, if they say, hey, that's a really nice suit you have on, then you just say thank you. Don't feel as if you have to say, yeah, yours is okay. Could be better, but it's okay. Those are the kinds of conversations you want to stay away from. Expect small talk. Now, you heard in one of the examples them saying, be up with current affairs. Now, current affairs doesn't mean expect to walk into an interview and have somebody say, hey, how about that Liz Truss resigning as prime minister after less than a month? That's probably not going to happen in a job interview, but if something big just happened in this country yesterday or today, be prepared for them to ask about it. If it's, they might ask about an election result, which again is something you want to stay away from the politics of it, but they might say, boy, that was a wild night. If you think back to the last presidential election, that was a wild night. You went through the whole night and didn't know who the president was. So they might make a comment like that. They might ask about the weather. Be prepared for that, and be prepared for them to ask you small talk kind of questions like, how was your commute to get here? How was the traffic? If the weather is kind of like this, they might ask, did you get caught in the rain coming in? Did you have trouble finding us? That's a question I've heard people ask a lot. Did you have trouble finding us today? You know, those are the kinds of things you should be prepared for. And then have an answer ready for the first question. And the first question in many cases, I won't say all, because everyone's different, but the first question in many cases is, and you heard it on one of the examples, tell me about yourself, or why are you interested in this job, or what is it about you and your background that makes you feel like you're the best candidate for this position. I think I shared with you before that by the time I interview a candidate, they've gone through several steps. They've met with a search committee, they've met with a hiring manager, and then they come in to see me. I don't really have to ask them about their background because I know that others have already done that, and I could see it on this person's resume. So I will ask questions like, tell me what is it about this job that interests you? Or looking at your background and talking to the people that you've already met with here who've told me a little more about yourself. It seems like this job is a little different than what you've done in the past. So what is it about the job that makes you so interested? And that's a lot of how I get my conversations going. And those are the kinds of things that you might hear from the person interviewing you. So have those answers ready. You should have every answer ready because you can probably figure out, based on the job, what the kinds of questions are that somebody's going to ask you. What's your experience? What's your education? What organizations, or what do you do in your spare time? Those are all okay things to answer. Think about what it is, though, you're going to say about what do you do in your spare time. Because, you know, pounding down a 30-pack with my buddies is not a good answer for what I like to do in my spare time. So make sure that you have those kinds of answers ready. Listen to the person interviewing you. I know that sounds silly, but I've had this situation happen to me as a candidate where I go in, I'm sitting down, I'm asked the first question or the first 2 or 3 questions, and then my mind is racing. What else might this person be asking me? Or, oh, I wish I didn't say that, or I wish I added this to my answer, so I have to figure out how to go back and add this. And then all of a sudden, as my mind is spinning and I'm thinking things through, I'm not listening to potentially the next question. So we've talked about listening here and how listening is active, hearing is passive. Be an active listener. Listen to what you're being asked, listen to what the interviewer is saying, and then learn from it. Because that's when the person might say, I'll tell you what our greatest need is right now, Emma. Our need right now is for someone who doesn't mind working extra hours, working weekends, maybe doing some travel. Well, there you go. Then you can start formulating an answer to that, even if they're not even asking you a question yet. They might just be telling you, here's what our greatest needs are. And then eventually they're going to say, so how do you think you match up with this job? And you can say, well, you said that you want someone who's going to work hard. And I think in every job I've had, you'll find, if you talk to my references, that I've worked hard. You mentioned travel. I love the idea of traveling. So you can play off of what you hear and what you learn. And then you can use it to your advantage. Be honest. You heard that on one of the examples. Be honest about what you say. Don't misrepresent your background. Don't misrepresent what your experience has been. And really, you shouldn't even misrepresent what your interests are. Because what you don't want, just to get the job, you don't want to say, oh yes, I love Excel spreadsheets. And then all of a sudden you get the job and the first thing you have to do is work off Excel spreadsheets and you can't stand Excel or you don't know it. So don't misrepresent anything. Be honest and be enthusiastic, because especially in internships, co-ops, first jobs, they want your energy and enthusiasm probably more than they want any experience that you might have. So there is a balance between those. And then finally, be clear and concise. And you saw the example of the candidate who just started telling her life story. And that is a trap you don't want to fall into, because if they say, tell me a little about yourself, that really means a little. That's not, I was born in a log cabin in the middle of Kentucky, and here's what I did when I was 3 and what I did when I was 7. They just want to know, here's my background, here's my experience, here's my education, and this is why I think I'm qualified for the job. And then finally, a lot of times the interviewer will say, is there anything else you would like to say? And that's where you sell yourself. Regardless of whether or not you've already said it, which you probably have in different questions, different answers during the interview. Have something prepared. So just as I said to you, have answers ready for the very first question, have that last question. Make it a good bookend, because the two things they're going to remember is their first impression, those first 17 seconds, and then they're going to remember the very last thing, the last impression. And so when they say, is there anything else you'd like to say? Have something ready. Here's what I think I can bring to this job. Here's what makes me unique. Here's what makes me a great candidate. Not the best candidate, because you don't know who the other candidates are, and the manager will think that. But here's what makes me a great candidate for this job. And have a short 30-second summary. They will almost always say to you, what questions do you have for me? The candidate I interviewed yesterday had 3 questions handwritten on a notebook, a spiral notebook. And when I said to her, what questions do you have for me? She had her notebook right in front of her. And she did say, 2 of the questions that I had, you've already answered, because I wanted to know about this and I wanted to know about that. But here's one question that I have. And then she told me her question. And your questions could either pick up on something the interviewer said. You saw that in the example. You said that your sales, you expect sales to increase by 15% this quarter. How do you think you're going to get there? Or what do you need to get there? Or how could I help you get there? Or what does success look like for the person who's going to be in this role? Because then when they tell you, here's what success looks like, that's when you say, well, that's me. I can do exactly what you said success looks like. This is your chance. Where would you like to see the company or the organization in the next 5 to 10 years? Give them a chance to say, here's my vision. Or you can even go backwards and say, what do you think have been the secrets to your success? Either you as the hiring manager, you as a CEO, you as a manager, what have been the secrets to your success? Or what do you like best about working in this company? Or what do you think's been the secrets to the company's success? Where do you see the company going in 5 or 10 years? Tell me what an average day looks like for the person in this position. And then you could say, or is there even such a thing as an average day? And let them talk about what their vision is for the position. And then I've actually used this last question. I've never seen it in a video. I've never heard of anyone promoting it, but I've done this, where I've said, tell me what's preventing you from offering me this job right now. And a lot of times they won't have an answer. They'll be dumbfounded by it. And they might say, well, I do have some other candidates that we have scheduled. And your answer can be, that's great. And I hope that you'll compare those candidates to me. Or I hope that by the time you finish with those candidates, you'll realize that I'm the best person for this position. Because they want to see that confidence. They want that enthusiasm for the job. So ask that question. I guarantee you a manager will like that, will like to hear that from you. And then again, you're finishing, shake their hands, eye contact, thank them, and then go back and follow up with a note immediately. My interview yesterday was at 3 o'clock. First thing this morning, I had an email in my inbox from that candidate. Now, one thing that people always kind of question is, should your thank you be via email or a handwritten note? I would say to whatever extent you can, do both, but email is a must. Now, people will say that something handwritten is very personal and something that people will remember, and that's true, but by the time you sit down and write that note, put it in an envelope, find a stamp, bring it to a mailbox, it gets there, it has to go through the process of getting to this person and then being opened up. That could be 4, 5, 6 days from then. They might have already made a decision. So send an email right away, and then if you can follow up with a handwritten note, you can say, as I mentioned in my follow-up email, here's why I think I'm the best candidate. Questions? Anybody? All right. So Thursday, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about removing the crutches, removing what some people refer to as the filters that we use, ahs, ums, likes, you knows. How do we get those out of our daily conversations and certainly out of our prepared remarks? And again, think about the 2-minute exercise that we're going to do on November 15th. How can you sell yourself in 2 minutes? I'll ask you a couple of questions. We'll do almost like a mock interview. How can you sell yourself in 2 minutes? Think about your final. We'll talk about that. Presentations, let me know by not this class, but next Tuesday's class, if you have a preference for which of these 4 days you do your final. If not, I'll just assign them randomly. No class Tuesday of Thanksgiving. And then one more reminder for you, if you noticed on the syllabus, next Thursday. So on Tuesday, we're going to have a class about storytelling. Storytelling because that's important in your presentation. Not storytelling as in Winnie the Pooh, but storytelling as in how can you make your remarks personal. On Thursday, we're going to have a guest in here, a good friend of mine who's a faculty member at Boston College, who is an expert in storytelling and who also has been a news anchor, news reporter. She directs the internship program in the communications and journalism department at BC. So a lot of the things that we've talked about over these last couple of weeks are her specialties as well. So she's going to join us and share some of her thoughts with you as well. And again, if you need any help from me, you know how to find me over the next few weeks. Some of you have shared with me your resumes. I'm happy to look at resumes and make some comments and get them back to you. You can do that anytime, whether it's this semester or beyond. So just keep that in mind. All right, I'll see you on Thursday.